This is the last Sunday of the liturgical year. Next week we begin again. It's like the Christian New Year. We celebrate beginning next Sunday, the season of Advent. And our worship will change completely. We have all kinds of new things prepared for you. So I do hope that you'll be here. You'll see colors change from green to blue. And you'll see our Advent banners come out again. And the themes of Advent, preparing us to receive God's inbreaking into the world. And in the United States, it's just happenstance that it does, but the church year ends around the time of Thanksgiving, the time of harvest. We celebrate this historically rooted Thanksgiving Day, cleaned up into the Pilgrims and Indians of school plays that lead us to believe that they all just got along and it was really good and they had this big table of friendship. Those European settlers knew what it meant to endure hunger, disease, death, hardship, and grief. We don't see that on the faces of the pilgrims in the school plays, but it's true. And yet, on that day, they gave thanks to God on what we now know as the first Thanksgiving of 1621. So in the traditions of their native lands, wherever they were from, and of their faith, harvest traditions of giving thanks, they gathered on that day with friends and strangers, 53 pilgrims, and 90 Native Americans. They gathered in gratitude to God. Thanksgiving, not the day, well, the day too, but Thanksgiving as an act of gratitude is in our heritage. The historic parade of Judeo-Christian scriptures express gratitude. Gratitude to God as the one who delivers, who sets free, who chastises, who helps, who creates, and who blesses. From the many psalms of thanksgiving, like this one that I remember memorizing in first grade, Psalm 100. Enter God's gates with thanksgiving, and the holy courts with praise. Give thanks and bless God's name, for the Lord, whose steadfast love endures forever, is faithful to all generations. So from the Psalms, all the way to the epistles and the Gospels, to that beautiful and moving Pauline text, that calls us to rejoice always, to pray without ceasing, and in everything, give thanks. Why? Because this is the will of God, that we rejoice, that we pray, and that we give thanks. My experience and my spiritual contention is that gratitude is the heart and foundation of a healthy spiritual life. Let me say it again, because I believe it so clearly and firmly. My experience and my spiritual contention is that gratitude is the heart and foundation of a healthy spiritual life. If I begin with gratitude in waking up each morning or in dealing with my material desires, contending with negative attitudes, or even with problems that seem overwhelming, if I begin with considered, thoughtful, sincere, and prayerful gratitude, it changes everything, because it changes me. Gratitude shifts my relationship with God and others. It puts life in a more hopeful kind of tone. It gives me more patience. It clarifies my priorities. And perhaps most importantly, gratitude for others, gratitude for people in my life, and their very best attributes, helps me to love. What would it be like if we looked at each other, even people that annoy us, if we looked at them all and gave thanks for the gifts that they bring to our lives? We'd see them differently. We'd understand our own attitudes and our own love for them very differently. But most of us have expectations about what life will bring to us, what life should bring to us, and what life should not bring to us. We're shocked. And we may even have our faith compromised if we meet in life what we consider undue difficulties, more trouble than we think we deserve. You wouldn't believe how many times pastors hear things like, "But I didn't do anything to deserve it." And we know that that's not how life or God works. But somehow we feel picked on, singled out for hardship, unblessed somehow, even shunned by God. Oh, sure, we may have things to be grateful for. But those clouds of discomfort or discouragement or even despair compromise our gratitude. And we end up saying something like, "Well, I'm grateful, but I'm thankful. But there's this one person at work that seems like she sets out to make my life miserable. Well, I'm thankful for my job, but I haven't had a raise since 2007. Of course I'm grateful. Of course I am, but well, I just feel unsettled and discontent most of the time. I'm thankful, but how can you not stay upset about the state of politics and the condition of our world? How can you not? I'm thankful that LGBT people have made progress in our country, but we still don't have marriage equality in Georgia." Now, I didn't make up any of those things. I've heard them all said by people who were trying to express gratitude in their lives. But, now at least some of these are legitimate problems. Probably all of them are. We know that because we all have them. Worries and illness and war and financial woes do disturb us deeply. But I wonder if the realization and coming to grips that with the reality that troubles are simply a part of life, and that God is with us in it and through it all, that we have the love of community and the wonder of life today. I wonder if realizing these things, if remembering them, I think we probably realize them, but if we remember them, if this could have the capacity to intensify rather than compromise our gratitude. Living fully in the present. Realizing the gifts that we do have and feeling gratitude may be two sides of the same coin. In today's text from Deuteronomy, the one that Meredith read, the preacher offers a strong word about what it means to be thankful and how to enjoy true gratitude. How to really feel it and internalize it and give thanks to God. He's preaching to a people, you see, whose ancestors were slaves in Egypt. That was still a part of their collective memory. Part of the people who struggled in the wilderness for many years and have come at long last to the land that God promised. They've been set free and they've been given a land, but both slavery and wilderness loom in their cultural collective consciousness. And so to these who know about hardship, to these who know about promise delayed, the preacher says, so when you've come to the land that God is giving you as an inheritance, and when you settle in, take some of the first fruits of the harvest, put it in a basket, and go to the place that God will choose as a dwelling for God's name. So God gives the land. And those who receive that gift after many years of promise offer back with power and productivity, offer back to God the first produce. You see, God gives, and then God receives back from joyful recipients. God's gift then, all of God's gifts, the ones that come from the earth, the ones that we receive in our souls, are reciprocal. God gives, And then in gratitude, the people give in return. Then something altogether radical is called forth from the prophet of God. This is what he says. You shall set the basket of first fruits down before God. Then, together with the Levites and those and the aliens who reside among you, you shall celebrate with all the bounty that God has given to you and your house. That is, their Thanksgiving feast is to include those who cannot easily fend for themselves. Levites were those holy people in the land who owned nothing. And therefore, for their very survival, they rely on the gifts of others. So Levites and aliens, that is, strangers, immigrants who have come to Israel seeking asylum, gather them around your table. So as early as Deuteronomy, the ethics of thanksgiving for God's gifts is to share with the aliens and those without in their land. Giving thanks in all its fullness, means that all are fed. If some are hungry, then the intentions of God's good gifts have been compromised, and thanksgiving is not complete. So the final word of thanksgiving is well-being shared all around when all are fed. Just as the Native Americans gave freely to those battered invaders who had nothing, the preacher in Deuteronomy calls this forth as God's way. In sharing, there is blessing for all. Gratitude. Through and in life's hardships, gratitude is known and multiplied when we share. Could it be that we could know gratitude even when life brings us struggles and sadness mingled with hope and joy? Could we, without qualification this year, give thanks? Not ungrateful, but just ungrateful. And in the sharing, multiply it. What if we could say and feel and be in the state of thanks? If we could say directly to those who bless our lives, thank you. If we could say to the source of all that is to God, thank you. No buts, no if onlys, no thought diminishing our gratitude, but thank you. What if we invite ourselves then to stay in this territory of gratitude, right here and right now? If we sit with it, if we take a walk with our gratitude and see what we see, if we sing a song with our gratitude, if we invite others to that blessing table, we would realize more deeply and more practically our ability to share what we have. Our gratitude, I believe, would infiltrate those places of regret and want and worry and fear. It would. It will. And gratitude has the power to transform those regrets and wants and fears when they aren't compromised by buts, the words and actions of gratitude. Thank you. I'm grateful. Are powerful beyond all measure. So we're putting away the I'm thankful but I'd like to invite us to get out another conjunction. And. We're thankful and. We're thankful and we're responsible on this day of Thanksgiving that has heritage in our country for confessing that what we have done, that what we have and what we are thankful for is sometimes ours at the expense of others. It's true that English colonists found a sort of friendship in their encounter with native people. After their long and grueling journey, their first year was filled with devastating loss. 102 settlers actually landed in New England, but only 53 survived the winter together at that first Thanksgiving. Some, we're told, resorted to stealing corn that was planted by the natives, and even stealing the offerings of food that were left on Indian graves. But amazingly, the Native Americans, including the famous Squanto, remember him from elementary school, taught settlers how to plant crops that would thrive in the soil in America, how to fertilize the soil, how to fish. The natives knew the land, and they knew how to get along with other cultures because they'd done it with other tribes. They shared their survival skills and their knowledge with the pilgrims, equipping them to produce the harvest that culminated in that feast. Because of this kindness, those who remained, the settlers who remained, could start life anew. And they celebrated the harvest of 1621 together. It was indeed a peaceful, cross-cultural exchange, but within 50 years, these native tribes were no longer free people. They were taken, their land was taken by the very settlers that they had helped. And so for some Native Americans, we know that Thanksgiving is understandably a time of painful cultural memory rather than an occasion for celebration. Most of us, not all, but most of us, on the other hand, while we may have an ounce or two of Native American blood, have inherited instead the tradition of our European ancestors and the entitlement of our British or Dutch forebears, and the assumption that our needs or wants can be met even if others' lives are compromised by low wages or inadequate working conditions, so that we can get the goods for our own survival and comfort at a reasonable price, of course. First world people have, we know, maintained unexamined attitudes with numerous groups of people. And unfortunately, not all of us care enough to make ourselves aware and make the decisions that would care for others' welfare on a par equal with our own. Think farm workers. We've heard about them in this congregation, haven't we? Think factory workers who are paid well below minimum wage in outsourced labor in poor countries or in our own. Have you heard the latest from Walmart? The mega retailer is taking up contributions this Thanksgiving, not for homeless folks, but for their own employees who can't afford Thanksgiving dinner because their wages are substandard. So the corporation is getting rich, they may say blessed, on the backs of workers who are not paid adequately. So my friends, as we approach Thanksgiving, let's consider, let's remember whose labor brings us the things that we have. Let's be willing to question the ethics of companies that bring us inexpensive goods. And then, if we dare, let's consider what we can do out of gratitude to make sure that all are fed. In the tradition of Deuteronomy, the first word we say to immigrants or farm workers or factory workers whose goods we give thanks for is not, "Are you legally documented?" Rather, the first words that come out of our mouths as people of God with thankful hearts, we say, "Come, come, and join us at the table of God's good gifts." So there's a tension in this day, isn't there? Will we unthinkingly settle into turkey and football and say a brief prayer before a traditional meal? Or will we think about it between now and then and bring our heartfelt thanksgiving without the buts, even in the middle of our sometimes rocky lives? Will we watch the ads for Black Friday deals and not give a thought to ethical commerce? Or will we give thanks and realize all of our Thanksgiving's holy implications for justice and generosity? Will we express the courteous social response and maybe even religious duty of saying thank you to others and thank you to God? Or will we set out on a deep spiritual path of gratitude every day that draws us closer to God? If we'll take these other paths, this second path, this path less traveled, our gratitude, our heart of gratitude and joy will take root in us and will grow, I promise. In giving that flows out of gratitude, there is enough for all. And each day, we'll find ways to share the blessings and serve others with grace. It'll happen. I promise you, it will happen. If we wake up looking for ways to give thanks, it will make us generous people. It will make us more grateful people. It will draw us closer to the heart and being of God. God meets us in our thanksgiving, meets us with more blessing, with more ways to serve, with more abundant food at the table. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving. Pass it on. Pass it on. Amen. In first grade, Psalm 100. Enter God's gates with thanksgiving and the holy courts with praise. Give thanks and bless God's name, for the Lord, whose steadfast love endures forever, is faithful to all generations. So from the Psalms all the way to the epistles and the Gospels, to that beautiful and moving Pauline text that calls us to rejoice always, to pray without ceasing, and in everything, give thanks. Why? Because this is the will of God, that we rejoice, that we pray, and that we give thanks. We hope that you'll be here. You'll see colors change from green to blue, and you'll see our Advent banners come out again, and the themes of Advent preparing us to receive God's inbreaking into the world. And in the United States, it's just happenstance that it does, but the church year ends around the time of Thanksgiving, the time of harvest. We celebrate this historically rooted Thanksgiving Day, cleaned up into the Pilgrims and Indians of school plays that lead us to believe that they all just got along and it was really good and they had this big table of friendship. Those European settlers, Pilgrims, and 90 Native Americans, they gathered in gratitude to God. Thanksgiving, not the day, well, the day too, but Thanksgiving as an act of gratitude is in our heritage. The historic parade of Judeo-Christian scriptures express gratitude. Gratitude to God as the one who delivers, who sets free, who chastises, who helps, who creates, and who blesses. From the many psalms of thanksgiving, like this one that I remember memorizing, knew what it meant to endure hunger, disease, death, hardship, and grief. We don't see that on the faces of the pilgrims in the school plays, but it's true. And yet, on that day, they gave thanks to God on what we now know as the first Thanksgiving of 1621. So in the traditions of their native lands, wherever they were from, and of their faith, harvest traditions of giving thanks, they gathered on that day with friends and strangers, 53 This is the last Sunday of the liturgical year. Next week we begin again. It's like the Christian New Year. We celebrate beginning next Sunday, the season of Advent. And our worship will change completely. We have all kinds of new things prepared for you. So I do